NBC News correspondent Gabe Guttierez is on the border in Brownsville, Texas, near one of those tender age shelters. And MSNBC Capitol correspondent Garrett Haake is, of course, in the middle of the action in Congress. Gabe, let me start with you. Look, the Border Patrol, the head of the Border Patrol told me on Friday that if given the order, they could move immediately. But what's not clear is what do we do retroactively? What have you learned so far?
Oh, hi there, Chuck. Well, yes, as you were talking with Pete, the big question right now is how will these children be reunited with those family members? Immigration activists say it's not going to be possible that quickly, or as some authorities would have us believe. Now, we're here in front of a so-called tender age shelter, a Casa Presidente here in Brownsville, Texas. And Chuck, speaking with a congressman who toured this facility earlier, his name is Philemon Vela, he says that this is not what the Associated Press article seems to suggest, that these tender age shelters are entirely children under the age of 10. This shelter in particular has about 80 children, according to the congressman, ranging in age from less than 1-year-old to teenagers. About half of them or so, he says, were separated from their parents. And I want to read you his account of what he says he saw when he toured this facility earlier this week. He says in one room there were about 8 boys and girls, ages ranging from 3 to 5 years old. They were essentially being instructed as you would see in any preschool class. But the other room that he was taken into had 4 infants, all under the age of 1. Now, 2 of those were with their mothers, he says, teenage girls. The 2 others were 1-year-old and 8-month-old. One of them had been separated from her sister, and somewhere along the way, their mother had died. The other infant had been separated from her mother, is what he was told, and he saw that they were being fed by the personnel in this facility. He said the facility itself was very clean, but the question he has is, why these children were separated from their parents in the first place. But as you said, Chuck, now that these children have been taken to 14 states, New York alone, Mayor Bill de Blasio saying that more than 200 children have been taken to New York alone. What happens with these children, and with children this young? How do you get information about who their parents are? How logistically you manage this reunification process? And that still needs to be ironed out in the coming days, Chuck. And you just already heard about from the congressman. You have one whose mother died on the trek. That just only adds to those complications. Right. Gabe Guttierez, thank you very much. I know you've got some work to do for nightly. Let me turn to Garrett up on Capitol Hill. So, Garrett, obviously the president in the order essentially taunts Congress to get something done on this. Frankly, the court case that orders children sort of that the president claimed was tying his hands in the first place is something Congress has to address. Are they ready to address it? Is it going to be standalone, or are they still going to try to insert it into a bigger immigration bill?
Well, Chuck, they're going to try to address it. There's probably 1.5 plans from the original half a dozen or so we were talking about last night floating around here on the Senate side. The one that seems to probably have the most momentum right now is one led by Tom Tillis that has more than a dozen Republican senators signed onto it, including the majority leader, Mitch McConnell. It looks a lot like what Ted Cruz had proposed earlier in the week. It adds immigration judges to speed up the process. It mandates that families be kept together, and kept together in family shelters, not in things like that converted Walmart that we've seen all those horrifying pictures of earlier this week. That's the one piece of legislation that looks like it's ready to go in the Senate. Earlier this evening, you had a group of bipartisan senators, everyone from Dianne Feinstein to Ted Cruz, meeting in Susan Collins' office to try to hash through whether perhaps there's something else that the Senate can do on a bipartisan basis. Because several senators I talked to do recognize the fact that this executive order, really only buys them time. It is absolutely not a lasting solution. The House side's a whole other problem, Chuck. They're trying to deal with these 2 broad-based immigration bills that they're supposed to have votes on tomorrow night, both of which look like they're in trouble, despite the White House working very hard today to convince skeptical Republicans that this is what they need to vote for. I'm curious, Garrett,
I got the sneaking suspicion that one of the reasons the president caved on this is that he figured if he didn't, it made it even that much harder to get any of those bills passed tomorrow. Is that why he may have tried to get this out of the way, to see if he could have a better shot at passing one bill in the House?
Well, I try to stay out of the president's head, Chuck, but I do think there is a feeling among Republican lawmakers here that this now gives them something to vote for, right? They feel like if they vote for one of these two bills, likely the leadership bill, this compromise bill, it gives them a pathway out of this. Look, they can say, we're helping the president with a priority of his. We're helping end this border separation. Never mind who may have started it. Never mind that the president started it essentially with this policy. But it does give Republicans who may not have otherwise felt strongly about this issue or may have been concerned that the president might roll back on them and accuse them, or their base might accuse them of voting for amnesty, a reason to say, look, we're going to vote for this because we see this as an issue, these separations that need to be addressed. But again, that just might not be enough. The House continues to have these two bills be moving targets, and it's very unclear if there's enough support to get either one of them across the finish line.
Yeah, and as we know, it's already been said, dead on arrival in the Senate, especially in an election year when Mitch McConnell's trying to win a bunch of rural red states. Anyway, Garrett Haake on Capitol Hill for us. Thank you. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.